They built empires, but when we asked them one question, something cracked. You'd expect pride, a smile, a wise phrase perhaps, but instead, there was a pause. Not the kind you expect, the kind that just happens, out of nowhere, a space where words should have been, and yet none came. They looked at us, lips moving, but silence filled the air, eyes darting, searching for something, like they were looking for the right words but couldn't find them. It was as if something was wrong, not in their body, but in their spirit, a flicker in their eyes, a quiet moment that stretched far too long. It wasn't just silence. It was something heavier, something that made us hold our breath. They had the answers, the success, the fame, the legacy we all admired. And yet, in this moment, they couldn't answer. It was almost like the weight of it all was too much to bear, like the truth was hidden, locked away so tightly, even they couldn't touch it anymore. And in that silence, everything we thought we knew about them began to shift. Just a crack, a brief glimpse of vulnerability. The room felt different. Their confidence faded, but it wasn't fear. It was something else. For just a second, they weren't the people we thought they were, not the towering figures we admired, but fragile, human. They built empires, conquered the world. But that silence, it revealed something else. It was a moment too short to understand, too fleeting to grasp. But in that brief silence, we couldn't help but wonder, what were they hiding? What was too heavy to say? And so we waited, like they did, hoping the words would come, but never knowing if they would. In that moment, we realized something. There was more to this story, more than they could share. The truth wasn't what we thought. They woke before the world. While the streets still slept, they were already moving, eyes wide open, minds sharper than razors. There was no time to waste. Not if you wanted to be someone. They trained when no one watched, studied when the party roared, built when everyone else rested. They said it was dedication. Some said obsession. But no one ever questioned the results. We saw the rise, the trophies, the headlines, the applause. We called them icons, unstoppable, unshakable, maybe even untouchable. But behind every success story was a silence they never spoke of. Not failure, not fear, something else. They gave up weekends, birthdays, comfort, even love, not because they had to, but because stopping felt impossible. There was always another rung, another level, another reason to keep going. People said they were driven, focused, wired differently. Maybe they were, but no one asked what it cost. They told the world they were chasing dreams. And maybe they were, but the truth, no one really knew what they were running toward, or what they left behind in the process. And somewhere along the way, they stopped looking back. Not because they didn't want to, but because looking back meant remembering what it took. And maybe that was the first thing they buried. They smiled in interviews, gave answers that sounded complete, but something always felt missing. Like they were telling us a story they didn't fully believe anymore. They spoke of sacrifice, discipline, vision. But in between the lines, we started noticing gaps, tiny pauses, before certain words, glances that lingered a little too long, moments where the light in their eyes flickered, as if part of them wasn't quite there anymore. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. In clip after clip, we began to hear it, a kind of echo, not in the sound, but in the feeling, like they were calling out to something they never quite reached. We replayed the tapes, watched the way they laughed, how they answered when asked about joy, about fulfillment, about peace. Sometimes they smiled too quickly. Sometimes they dodged the question. And sometimes they just looked down, as if trying to remember how it was supposed to feel. It wasn't about regret. Not yet. It was something quieter, more elusive, like a ghost in the background of a perfectly polished life. You could see it in the way they talked about their youth. The sparkle was there, but so was something else, something like loss. But when asked about it, they'd always change the subject. That's just part of the journey, they'd say. Wouldn't change a thing, but their voice always dipped on the word wouldn't. We began to wonder, what was it they weren't saying? What piece of the story never made it into the headlines? Because they had it all. The awards, the legacy, the crowd. And yet, sometimes behind the curtain, you'd catch them just sitting in silence, like they were waiting for something that never came, a kind of stillness that didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow. They had conquered every room they walked into, but sometimes they looked like strangers in their own skin. One of them once said, "I thought the noise would stop once I made it, but now it's just louder inside." That was the first time we started to realize this wasn't just about success. It was about something underneath it, something they didn't talk about on stage. We thought we knew the story, the climb, the win, the glory, but we missed the quiet aftermath. We missed the echo, and once it starts, you can't unhear it. Long before the stages, before the spotlight, before anyone called them great, they were just a kid, quiet, curious, noticed things others missed, a little too sensitive, a little too aware. They weren't born for the climb. They were shaped for it, not by choice, but by something else, somewhere along the way. They learned what love felt like only when they were useful. They learned that silence was safer than asking for more, that being good meant being enough, and being enough meant performing. So they did, and they got good at it, scary good. They learned to read rooms like maps. They could feel when a smile wasn't real. They knew when a tone shifted, when approval was slipping, and deep down, something in them decided, if I can just do more, be more, they'll stay. It wasn't ambition, it was survival. Success wasn't the goal, it was the shelter. Every trophy, every gold medal, every yes was another brick in the walls they built around the part of them that felt unworthy. But no one saw that part. They only saw the shine, the discipline, the greatness. They didn't see the child who flinched when footsteps echoed down the hallway, or the teen who stayed up all night trying to prove they weren't a mistake. They just saw the summit, but the roots, they were buried in a silence too old to name. Sometimes, when they spoke about drive, you could hear it, a tremble just beneath the surface, not fear, not even pain, just something tired, like they'd been carrying a weight since before they had words for it. But they never stopped, because the moment they did, the noise might catch up, and so they moved, faster, harder, higher. The world clapped. They smiled, but part of them was still there, back in the room where the silence first started. And maybe that's why they never talked about the past. Not really, because to look back meant remembering why they started climbing in the first place. And that was the first thing they swore to forget. And when they stood in front of the crowd, when the cameras flashed and the lights shined down like a halo, they wore something more than just a smile. It was a mask, not a lie exactly, not even a facade, but something more fragile. It was the best version of themselves, the version that fit, the version the world needed to see. Because behind the mask, there was another truth, one that couldn't be seen in the applause, one that couldn't be heard in the screams of their name. It was the truth no one asked for, and the one they never wanted to say. Behind the curtain of success, they weren't whole, they were scattered, a patchwork of stories, of needs, of emptiness that they couldn't talk about. The mask wasn't to deceive, it was to survive. Without it, they would have to face what was hidden. Without it, they would have to look at the truth they couldn't face. The truth that scared them. The truth that maybe, just maybe, they weren't enough. And when they weren't enough, everything felt like it would collapse. So they kept up the act. They kept the mask in place. And slowly, the world believed it was real. They did too, but the cracks never went away. They just hid in the shadows. They spoke in the silences between words, in the way they flinched when no one was looking, in the way their smiles never quite reached their eyes. And for a long time, they thought this was just part of the game, but the longer they played, the more the mask became them. Until one day, they weren't sure what was real anymore. Was it the mask? Was it the face underneath? Or were they both just parts of the same story? But they couldn't stop. Because without the mask, what would they have left? It starts with a flicker, a moment when they're alone, no cameras, no audience, just the quiet space between breaths. And in that space, they hear it, the silence. It's heavy, it's loud, it's unbearable. It's like the emptiness they've been running from, finally catching up. The truth they've buried so deep, it feels like it's breaking them in two, and they can't escape it. No matter how many trophies they've stacked, how many doors they've walked through, no matter how far they've climbed, the emptiness is still there. It's always been there. And this time, they can't outrun it. The walls that they built around their heart, the armor that they wore to keep the world out, it's not enough anymore. Everything they thought they wanted wasn't enough. The titles, the fame, the power, it was all just a distraction, a way to cover up the fact that they were still searching for something that had nothing to do with the world outside. But in this moment, when the world falls silent, they're forced to face the truth. They've been running towards something that was never going to be there. They've climbed higher than anyone, but they've been climbing in the wrong direction. The summit isn't the answer they thought it would be. It was just the next plateau, the next distraction. And now, standing there, on that high point they thought would change everything, all they see is the same view, the same emptiness, the same silence. And for the first time, they wonder, what if they were never meant to climb? What if they were meant to stop, to stand still, to breathe? But in that moment of stillness, they're paralyzed. Because they've been running so long, they've forgotten how to stop. They've been chasing the wrong thing for so long, they can't remember what it feels like to live. And the thought hits them. What have they sacrificed? Not just the years, not just the moments, but the very part of themselves they left behind. The part that's still there, waiting for them to come back. But it's too late to turn back now. The mask is too strong, the climb too high. And so they keep moving, keep climbing, because the silence is too loud to hear anything else. But the truth is, they already know it's too late. They stand there at the edge of everything they've ever known. And in that moment, the world starts to unravel. The success, the accolades, the applause, they all fade into the background, and for the first time, the truth comes rushing in. What were they running from? What were they chasing all this time? It wasn't the summit. It wasn't the fame. It wasn't the world's recognition. No. They were running from the one thing they could never escape. themselves. And now, standing here, everything they've sacrificed, the years, the relationships, the parts of themselves they've buried, it's all too heavy to carry. They've spent their whole life running from the quiet, the emptiness they felt deep inside because they were too afraid to face it. But now, the truth is undeniable. It was never about winning. It was about proving they were enough. But the hardest part was, they never believed it. All these years, they thought that success would fill the hole, that the higher they climbed, the further they ran from the pain, the more complete they would become. But instead, the higher they climbed, the farther they got from themselves. They thought the summit would give them peace, but all it gave them was distance. Distance from everything they truly wanted. And now, standing at the peak, they see it for the first time. The truth they've been avoiding. This wasn't the summit. This was the beginning of the end of the chase, the beginning of the return to who they've always been, the parts they left behind. But can they go back? Can they unmake the choices they've already made? The climb hasn't ended yet, but they've begun to see that the journey they've been on was never the one they were meant to take. They've been climbing the wrong mountain all along, and maybe, just maybe, it's time to finally stop running. And now, you're standing at the bottom of your own mountain. You've climbed so many, chased so many summits, and each time, you thought you'd found it, the answer, the peace, the purpose. But now, the air is still. You're not running, you're not climbing, just standing. And for the first time, you ask yourself, what if everything you've been chasing was just a distraction? What if the mountains were never the problem? What if you've been running in circles, climbing endless peaks, only to realize that the summit you're looking for is still out of reach? You've been told to go higher, to do more, to succeed, to conquer. But what if success wasn't the answer? What if it wasn't the summit that would set you free? What if you've spent your life climbing the wrong mountain? Maybe you've convinced yourself that once you reach the top, once you achieve enough, then you'll finally feel whole. But what happens when you reach the top and look down, only to find nothing but emptiness? What happens when you realize that all those peaks were just distractions from what you were really running from? Maybe it was never about climbing at all. Maybe it was about coming back down, coming back to the place you tried to escape. And now, standing at the bottom of your own mountain, you're left with one question. Whose summit are you really chasing? Because when you reach it, when you stand on that peak, will you hear the voices you silenced along the way? Will you hear the voices of the dreams you abandoned, the relationships you neglected, the pieces of yourself you ignored? Or will you finally listen to the quiet whisper that has been calling you all along? The whisper that says, you are enough, just as you are, and maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that the only mountain that matters is the one you stop running from, the one that's been there all along, waiting for you to see it. And only then, only when you face it, will you truly find peace, because climbing, chasing, succeeding, those were all ways to avoid the truth. But now, you're ready to stop running. The climb wasn't the answer. The stillness at the bottom, the quiet that forces you to face what you've always feared, that's where you'll find what you've been looking for all along. And now, you stand at the bottom, and you realize you've already arrived.